Kia ora koutou, welcome everybody to the first session of the Fabian Society for 2025. It's good to have you all here, and I'm pleased to see at least one mayoral hopeful in the audience, and perhaps there'll be a few more by the end of this evening. My name's Ollie Neas. I'm a freelance journalist and a lawyer here in Wellington, and it's my absolute privilege to be here on stage with our three panellists, Joel MacManus, Fleur Fizsimons and Thomas Nash. I'm sure they will all be familiar to many of you, but I'll say a few words about each of them before we begin. On your right is Thomas Nash. Thomas is serving his second term, I believe, on the Greater Wellington Regional Council and is a Green Party member on council and is the chair of the Transport Committee as well. Next to Thomas is Fleur Fizsimons. Fleur, as many of you will know, served on the Wellington City Council for a number of years. How many terms, Fleur? Just 5 years. And ran for the Labour Party in the Rongotai electorate last general election and is now the Assistant National Secretary of the Public Service Association. Then we have Joel MacManus. Joel is the Wellington editor for the Spinoff and was previously a Wellington issues reporter for Stuff and is probably, I think, in the top three journalists who most closely follow Wellington local politics. So please join me in welcoming our three panellists to the stage. All right, well, we're here tonight to talk about local government in Wellington, and to me, the last election feels very recent, and that election returned essentially a progressive majority in the Wellington City Council, and there was, I think, that was against the grain, the mood nationally, I think, and there's a lot of optimism at that time for those on the political left, but the world's changed quite a bit since then. So I want to start with the mood of the city. I think the prevailing wisdom right now seems to be that, well, at least according to some of the many lobby groups that have sprung up recently, that Wellingtons are having some kind of crisis of confidence, that the city's in trouble, and to some, our local representatives bear part of the blame for that. I wanted to ask you first how widespread you think that sentiment is, and to what extent is it a sentiment that you share? Thomas, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Ollie. And kia ora koutou katoa. Nice to see everybody here. Thank you for the invitation. And thanks for the welcome. So, I think there is always, in all of the local elections that I've been involved with, there's always a concern out there and amongst residents, and that you hear it here in the media and news channels, that the current leadership of councils is not doing enough, they're doing the wrong things, and they need to change. So I think that's a general theme that you always see, and understandably. Good to have a check on elected power. I think one of the differences now is that we've had quite a severe economic downturn that has been a little bit more concentrated in Wellington than it has been in the rest of the country, and I think you've also seen significant rates increases as councils have caught up with infrastructure deficits that have been allowed to persist for decades. So I think those two things combining, people have been hit in the back pocket by a recession, they've seen rates increases, so I think that sort of generalised theme of dissatisfaction with council leadership that you always hear about before a local election is going to be amplified this year. So I'd say that, yeah.
Yeah, well, kia ora everyone, and likewise thanks for the invitation. I think the starting point of the decline in view of Wellington happened really with the 2017 Kaikoura election, earthquake. To me, that earthquake did more damage to our pipes than anyone's ever admitted. And it also heralded the beginning of this earthquake-prone buildings. It started issues with Civic Square. And when I was doing phone calling during the election in 2019 after that, talking to people about what issues are important to them, Civic Square and the closure of the Central Library were huge. And I feel like it's been many problem after problem for Wellington since then. More recently, we've had really destructive cuts in the public sector. Those have damaged people, but they've also damaged Wellington. I'm personally, as a progressive, a bit cynical about the attempts to paint Wellington in a better light, or to show a good photo, or to talk ourselves into the city being in a better position, because I don't think as progressives we do the same for health or for education when we see destructive right-wing values being implemented in those areas. So for me, we should constructively engage with the problems facing Wellington. We do have a problem with water infrastructure, we have a problem with housing, we have a problem with transport. Climate change is a real issue that's Wellington in different ways because of our coastal nature. And I think our obligation is really to be realistic about those issues and come with constructive solutions. On the other hand, all the quirky things that we all love about Wellington are still there. So I don't want to overstate that here, but I just think as progressives we're better when we confront problematic issues front on.
Yeah, I think Fleur's completely right about the earthquake as being a very understated or underrated problem that kind of echoes out throughout everything that's happening in Wellington. And especially just the vibes, and won't go away. Few people, if the earthquake had only been a little bit stronger, and things had actually come down all in one go rather than a trickling out over about 6 or 7 years, and we might have got some, central government response and of sympathy from the rest of the country, we might be in quite a different position right now. Now, I know that's a little bit tough to say, but the library's a really good example. In terms of the feeling that the city is dying, I think the Central Library is probably the single most significant thing, and when that comes back, it will have a major vibe shift in terms of feeling like the city has a home again. I think there's kind of two things in terms of that I'm still weighing up in my head in terms of getting a sense of the mood of the city. The first is that I think at the last election there was a real dissatisfaction that Wellington had big issues and no one was really proposing solutions. It felt like people wanted a direction to go in and kind of would have accepted any direction, or at least compared to some candidates who were tinkering around the edges. I think Tory Whānau did run on a genuine new direction and new vision, and I think she got a lot of support from people who otherwise may not have supported it, because by comparison, it seemed a bit same on the other side. Now, there's kind of in terms of the thing now, there's two factors to consider that I think get conflated a lot. There is the public happy with the direction of the current council, and then there is the current happy with the state of the city. The city has had significant layoffs. It still has earthquake issues, and there are major rate increases, which I think it's fair to say, are mostly due to economic conditions. They're not specific to any particular council decision. You can argue around the edges, but the council in the country has had significant rate increases. I think there's probably going to be a pretty major rates backlash nationwide this year. I think a lot of incumbents are going to lose because no one is having their rates bill hiked up so much. The question is, is that therefore a backlash to the particular policies put forward by this council, and can the incumbents on council and the mayor make the argument that to get voters to separate the two in their minds? I think that's a pretty hard line, but I think that's kind of what they're going to need to.
We'll come back to some forecasts for the election. Thinking back to the beginning of this triennium, Joel, you mentioned the election of Tory Whānau. How would you characterise the last 3 years from the perspective of the progressive cause at the local government election? Has it been a story of success? Has it been a story of unmitigated failure, or somewhere in between?
I was thinking about this recently because there's sort of, on the day-to-day, it can kind of feel like this has been a council that's stumbled along. And then I kind of thought about what are the most significant decisions and things that have come out of the council under Tory Whānau's leadership. Housing, we had a new district plan, which is the most reformative change to Wellington's housing rules ever. Overnight, Wellington went from the most restrictive housing market in the country to the most permissive. That was enormous. On transport, things were already in motion, but under this council, there's been the most significant rollout of bike lanes and bus lanes the city's ever seen. And I think Tory deserves a lot of credit for fighting for not backing down on the Golden Mile in the new long-term plan. Now, again, that's a controversial position, but it is one she campaigned on and promised, and there was so many moments where she could have backed down on that, and she didn't. Now, I've seen that development kind of come and go so many times that I'm not going to until I see it. I want to see actual construction in the ground before it gets delayed again. But I think, if that happens and we see that, I think for, progressivism is wider than this, but for urbanism, it's actually possibly the most successful triennium we've ever seen.
Fleur or Thomas, do you want to pick up that? And feel free to answer by reference to council as well as City Council.
Yeah, I just would endorse the comments around housing and climate action. But what I would say, and the question was around whether the progressive majority has been well utilised, the readings of the bill and the attempted privatisation of our airport were absolutely unneeded and a massive distraction and caused some damage to relationships among progressives on this council. And I do think it was a disappointing approach. And I've a lot of time for Tory whānau, and I think it's very difficult to be a Māori woman in a leadership role in New Zealand, and we need to confront that as a country. But she also put privatisation of our airport on the table, despite a Green Party manifesto she signed up to saying public assets wouldn't be sold, and knowing that it would cause huge dissent among that progressive majority she had on her council. And it was a massive distraction, but also what we've got to remember as progressives, don't take people for granted. When you test relationships, you actually put the rest of your agenda at risk. You've got to work with people, and you've got to work with people in an upfront and politically honest way. So pointed about the airport and the Reading Cinemas deal, because I think that it takes away from the legacy that Joel quite rightly mentioned, and it was a dangerous distraction, and it was a real test of the left and progressive Wellingtonians. I'm really proud of the role that the union movement here in Wellington and the young ones in Wellington, Unions Wellington, played in resisting that privatisation of the airport, but it wasn't easy for them. They were put under huge pressure by people that I expect better moral leadership from. So yes, I think there is a legacy. It's positive in housing. It's got glimmers of hope in transport, and she's a bit of a victim of a change of government because it won't be as far as she'd like or that council would like. But a huge distraction on issues that, as the left, we should be united on.
Oh yeah, so thanks for the question. How would I characterise the last term, I guess, across Wellington City and Greater Wellington as it relates to the city from a progressive point of view? Yeah, I think housing, water, transport, those kind of core infrastructure requirements that relate to the material needs of everyday people have been significantly improved, and I think we don't really hear about that. But I think we will hear about it more, both in the election campaign, inevitably, but subsequently as well, when people are sort of enjoying the actual fruits of more homes, more dwellings, better transport solutions, and better water infrastructure. One thing that wasn't covered there, I guess, I agree with Joel that I think the sort of retooling of the city for the 21st century, tackling head on these big issues that have been neglected for so long on housing, on water and on transport, that's the story of the last 2 years for me. It's not the only story, there's lots of other things, but I guess I would say on the water side, there's been record investment in the renewal and upgrading of the reticulated water system. Lots of stuff that I feel we should be telling the story better about, like the Taranaki Street riser. That's going to facilitate thousands and thousands more dwellings in the central city, where the infrastructure costs to build a dwelling are far cheaper than building greenfield sites further away from the city centre. So that's huge. That stuff, that's real not particularly interesting unless you're interested in infrastructure, but it will really make a huge, significant difference. So the water stuff, I think, is big. The regional entity, again, boring kind of governance structure, not an interesting headline, but that will significantly set the city up for better success in housing and in daily life. And on the transport side, bus and bike lanes, really good. I think we need to do more on the bus lane side of things. We desperately need a new bus route through the central city using the harbour quays. That's been agreed. We need to start building it as soon as possible, hopefully this term. But just a couple of words on the bus service. So, how many people here use the bus service? Yeah, well, that's great. Me too, yeah. So you will have noticed, I hope, that there are significantly fewer cancellations. We're running at around 99, for 2024, I looked at the data recently, and we're running at around 99.35% reliability. So that's unbelievable. That's thank you. Oh, it's not just me, obviously, but it's mainly not me. That's world-class levels of reliability. We can do better, and we'll try to do better. But patronage is also at all-time record highs. We've never had more people using the bus in Wellington than we have today, so that's really satisfying. We'll continue to keep working on improving the bus service. So yeah.
Thomas, sticking with you, it seems that the council receives a lot more heat than the regional council. Is that because people forget that we have a regional council, or are you just doing a better job?
I think it is. We sort of fly under the radar. I think one thing is that the rates bill is collected by the territorial authority, so the city council. And so we just have a little thing in the back of your envelope which says, "Oh, hey, we're here too," and our rates bill is a fraction of what your city council rates bill is. So I think that makes a difference. It's sort of, and I think we definitely benefit from that as a regional council. I think we have a structure at the moment around the table and in the organisation, just not tolerating poor behaviour. We don't insult each other. We don't try to attack each other behind each other's backs. We tend to be more businesslike and more professional. And I think we have just a lot of trust around the table as a result. We don't tend to leak information that is confidential. Just sort of normal. We just don't do those things, right? We act more like a sort of business-like office where we treat each other as human beings that we respect and we want to work with, and we want each other to succeed. You'll never see I don't think you've ever seen a regional councillor attacking another regional councillor while I've been on the term. It's good. Hold the organisation to account, we get re-elected and we get things done. So we think it's a better culture than some of the other cultures you can see in other organisations that I think have sort of set in over time, right, and kind of become toxic.
Are you talking about other organisations of a local government nature in the Wellington area?
Yeah, I think you can see them around the world, but it's also like local government is well known for having toxic relationships around the world. Like, you need to look at Parks and Rec and all the rest of it. It's a phenomenon that is sort of well known. I think it's been bad around the table. I think elected members in New Zealand have not covered ourselves in glory. So I don't want to preach about it, but I think we were described as a boring den of civility by Tom Hunt at the. So we're all like, oh, awesome. so that gives you a flavour of in our corner of the elected member universe. But not to be too glib, I think we don't deal with. We're not the road controlling authority, so we don't take car parks away. We don't issue. We don't deal with services like rubbish and parks, and we have regional parks, but everyday parks that lots of people go to. A lot of the heat in terms of landfills and rubbish, that's I think is more prone to developing heat from residents, and that can, I guess, generate stress amongst the elected members and the officials. So we probably have a more strategic, slightly. The bus is the one, I guess, where and I have definitely felt some heat generated by that.
Sticking on the topic of heat, I'm interested in your thoughts on whether there are any major issues or successes at the local government level that you feel like are not properly being covered in the media. And Joel, I'll be interested in your thoughts on this as someone who's worked in quite different media outlets. I mean, how do you go about deciding what to write about? Is it self-evident, or do you feel like there's quite a lot of, I guess, journalistic selection there?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, it changes a lot based on what your role is and what kind of stuff you're trying to do. I think with what I do now, I have a lot more room writing windbag to get into an issue I'm just genuinely interested in. I can sort of dig into the details. I can kind of explain things. If you're discussing reforms to the district plan, it kind of, you need that space and you need that room to just sort of, you know, give it some analysis and give it some explainer. I think in a more like traditional newsroom, like at a daily newspaper, just by design or like by necessity, you need conflict, because you kind of need, people are disagreeing about this, call someone up, get a quote, call someone else up, get a different quote. And a lot of the time, I mean, I just personally, I had a lot of times that I found it kind of tedious. You know, there were so many times I had to ring Thomas to be like, Thomas, what do you think? I could have written it myself. I knew what he thought. But it's... and so I think it can be part of it is that the clash gets covered more than the policy. But I don't necessarily think that's a cultural issue with any one particular newsroom or organisation. I think that's kind of the way a lot of daily news just operates, because that's the way daily news is.
Fleur mentioned before the airport sale, which was obviously a major issue in the last year, and that culminated in the appointment of Crown Observer. The reasons that were given for that were complicated. There was a few reasons given. I'd be interested in your thoughts as to whether or not, or what you make of that decision. Are there legitimate reasons that you think warranted some kind of involvement from central government? And even if you think it didn't justify intervention, do you think the issues that are being spoken about there are real? Fleur, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I think it was performative from the government. They wanted to be able to say they've done something with a very high-profile council that seemed to be getting into trouble. I don't think they had any intention to help sort the issues in Wellington, and if they did, they would take a much more serious approach to water reform or transport investment. But I think there is a deeper issue going on at Wellington City Council, local government in general, and that is a failure to respect democracy. If you asked a member of the executive leadership team at the City Council, who are very senior, very well-paid executive leaders, where they get their legitimacy from, where do you get your legitimacy from? Where does that come about? Not one of them would tell you it came through elections. So the whole idea of no taxation without representation is foreign to them. They think they get their legitimacy by their profession or by their appointment as a council staff member and a senior executive of the leadership team. And look, some of that, to be fair to them, is by design. The statute does set up a system where chief executives and their senior leaders have much more power. But at Wellington Council, my impression was that some of it was a deeply ingrained cynicism against democracy as well. And I think you saw that with the airport sale and even the readings deal. I don't think Tory whānau had as much power as we would all expect a democratically elected mayor to have. And I think it's a problem in Wellington that is difficult to talk about, because all of those people are good people and they are professionals and they want to do a good job. But there is a deeply ingrained undemocratic sentiment that operates there that actually leads to the kind of squabbles and fights and frustrations that you see. My first question when I was elected as a city councillor was, how do I get something on the agenda? The answer was, you can't. You have to do a notice of motion. And then I found out a notice of motion was this really aggressive action that was an attack on the chief executive. You can't put things on the agenda. Finding a way to have your voice heard and to make change is really, really difficult. And I think what we see in some of the things that you're talking about is a of that ingrained design and a deeply undemocratic nature or culture at Wellington City, yeah.
Yeah, so the question was about the Observer, was it justified, and I mean, I think it wasn't justified. I think it was basically, like theatre, a kind of, it looks good. I think the minister was under a lot of it seemed like the minister was under quite a bit of pressure to do something. It's sort of one of those things that could sort of talked itself into existence, that you can see happen in politics. So I don't know. Wellington City Councillors in the room, has it been good? Has it calmed things down? Seems a bit calmer, but maybe that's just been the summer break. I don't know, you'd have to ask them for an answer about that. I'm not there. But I think the question about the relationship between the sort of executives, who are, by the way, very well paid, and elected members who are much less well paid for the amount of time they're spending on things. So that in itself is a power imbalance, which never gets talked about, but is quite significant, I think, in terms of the sort of careerism, the sort of managerialism, the sort of belonging to a professionalised class is quite an important consideration. That might be a bit too philosophical for right now, but I think it is an issue and needs to be talked about more. I do think, like you said, Fleur, there is, let me put it this way, we have a really good relationship between me as the chair of the Transport Committee, the chief executive, Nigel, and Darren, the chair. We just talk about everything. We just share everything. We work on everything together. We don't try to set each other up or worry about what the other one's thinking. We just talk about it, ring each other up. So there's a lot of trust there, and I think that it builds a better culture. I think if you don't trust each other, if you're trying to manoeuvre each other as elected members, then the chief executive is going to be like, hang on a second, I got to stay out of this. I got to make sure we're actually fulfilling our mandate as an organisation. And so I think you get that separation, which I think you can see at Wellington City Council for sure, and other places around. So yeah, I think building those relationships of trust and confidence, developing a strong culture that doesn't tolerate poor behaviour from individuals, that's super important.
So on the first point on the Crown Observer, I think it was pretty clearly political opportunism on behalf of the minister. It was a partisan opportunity to embarrass a prominent politician who didn't share his stripes. That's the game of politics. I don't necessarily, whatever. He'll do that. Whether it was actually necessary, I mean, the fact that the first LTP fell through we gave him cover. It was a good enough reason. I don't think the fundamental issues were serious enough that it was necessary, but sure, and it was just, the justification was there. But I think we should just see it as what it is just playing politics. In terms of the relationship between executive and staff, I mean, these two have obviously been in the engine room a little bit more than I have. I haven't been there at all. I just watch from the outside like everyone else. But I think there is I would kind of say that I think there's a bit of a trend in local government, but in all, where I think progressive leaders tend to take this attitude of working with the executive and, become a little bit ingrained in the professional managerial class, whereas sometimes it is the Conservatives, like, for example, Wayne Brown, has actually been very good at coming in and smashing the system and making this, not trying to work within the system, but making the system work for him. And I think there's probably a bit of a game of not thinking about the system, but think, what do I want to do? And let's do it.
Just say one more thing. One thing I forgot to say. I do think the current government has a slight obsession with Wellington City Council. The Prime Minister came to talk to all elected members around the country, I don't know, there's 1,000 of us or something, and he just talked about the convention centre that wasn't even agreed under the current term, and cycleways. And it was just I was talking to elected members who I knew from, Tararua District and the South Island, and they were like, what on earth is he talking about? We don't relate to this. We came here to talk about local government in New Zealand, and he's gone on some obsessive rant about one particular council that doesn't even make sense. So I think there is a slight problem there with that sort of, I think the story around the Crown Observer as well.
My next question is cycleways, and that's the question. Are they the do people care about them as much as one might think? Sorry, I mean, let me rephrase the question to add a question mark onto the end. I think I certainly get the impression that there is, in some quarters, some very strong opposition to cycleways. I think it's very clear from a lot of the media coverage. How widespread is that sentiment, and do you think that will play a meaningful role in the election this year?
Well, I think it'll play a role because I think it'll get significant amount of reporting and letters to the editor, and I think it's a very, very strongly felt concern. And I think a lot of the issue is about car parking and space. I mean, loss of car parking or reallocation of road space. I do think a lot of reallocation of road space. I think the execution matters. So if you get it wrong in terms of how you've done it, how you've communicated it, how you've rolled it out, if you have to tear it up and do it again, that stuff really matters. You've got to communicate it well, you've got to execute it well. But I think in general, the reallocation of road space to share that public asset of the road more equally amongst different types of users, it tends to be less of a vote loser than you might think from the media coverage. Like in London, they did these low traffic zones. All the people who promoted those got re-elected, recently. Same in Paris, same in Montreal. Like a lot of places who've done this reallocation of road space exercise, all the people who promoted it, it was forecast of doom for them electorally, but they all won convincingly. So, and that's been quite widely covered. So, also I think in 2022, there was forecasts of doom for lots of people, partly due to the promotion of cycleways. It didn't materialise. In fact, the opposite materialised. And I do think we have a bit of a problem in Wellington and in general where there hasn't been enough media acknowledgement of wrong predictions. So I think you've got. I had people telling me, significant prominent journalists in the city saying, Tamworth Ball will never win Wellington Central. Tory whānau will never win the mayoralty. And they did, both massively convincingly, but it never gets acknowledged. You just move on and make another wrong prediction. And then you just move on. And it's just like, well, can you not just see that you've been consistently wrong? Is it not you that is out of touch, in fact, with the way people vote? So I think that's a issue that needs more exploring.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on your point, because there's a lots of negative coverage about cycleways, that means it'll be a defining issue. With Thomas, I lived in Island Bay through the Island Bay cycleway debacle, got elected twice, increased majority, despite being a strong advocate for it. And I think that if you look at the evidence, it's clear that people who promote cycleways do win elections. Is the reality. Tory whānau promised an accelerated cycleway plan. She got overwhelmingly elected. We've got what we were promised. I do think that the council isn't very good at designing or communicating around cycleways, and I think there's an arrogance in the approach to it. Some of the communication I saw with local businesses I was appalled by, and I don't think you build a constituency by writing roughshod over concerns. I think you're far better to sit down and talk with them, and there are some examples where the council has done that effectively and has delivered safe cycleway infrastructure. So my message always was to try and bring people with you, and also to talk to people about the fact that it's not an attack on you as a car driver right now, but in the future, as Wellingtonians, we're all going to need a different attitude towards our cars. We're not going to be able to all keep driving them and get car parks in the same places as we do now. Over time, we're going to need to change. And I found that when you talk about the future, so when you talk about the kind of future that you want for your children and grandchildren, some of the heat got taken out of it, and you could appeal to people's progressive elements, and they would see the value of things like cycleway infrastructure or the removal of car parks or the need for mass rapid transit or whatever it was. So I think there's a lot of lessons to the left, for the left, from cycleways and how they've been rolled out, but I totally reject the idea that they're unpopular. They have consistently, people who have supported them have consistently been elected in this city.
I mean, I'll just start by saying that cycleways are important and good. And you know, there are many reasons, but I don't even tend to focus on the climate or the equity reasons. It's just a matter of space. It's a matter of geometry. There is only so much space on a street and in all the street grids of a city, and cars are one of the most inefficient ways to move people around. So in order for a city to grow and expand, we need more movement of more people. and things like blocks are much smaller. You can move more people in the same amount of space. Public transport, trains are all more efficient movement for moving people in high density environments than cars are. So that has always been my central logic of why it is important to have a transport mix, because in order to grow as a city, especially a city constrained by size like Wellington, we cannot drive everywhere. Of equity, you know, a lot of people don't have room for a car park at their house. My flat doesn't have anywhere for a car to go, and that's where most of the housing growth in the city is coming from, is not from, you know, developments that have a 2-car garage next to it, it's from townhouses and apartments that need different transport forms to get around. Now, in terms of like the politics of it and the backlash, I think the backlash is legitimate and real. I'm just skeptical about its size. I am not convinced that there's a majority of voters who are, you know, want to vote to end the construction of cycleways and rip them all out. I do think there is exactly how big, but I think there is a not insignificant number who are very frustrated but intensely motivated by the issue, and that will lead to, you know, money, donations, frustration, anger, door knocking, campaign volunteers for candidates who are willing to push that issue. I'm just not convinced it's a winning issue for that candidate.
Well, let's move to, or continue with perhaps the positive vision. Is there a coherent progressive agenda yet for local government in Wellington for the year ahead? Is there a set of ideas that we can point to and say this is what, from a left perspective, this year's election will be about?
From talking to some of the people on council, I think they've gone through last year as a very big, busy and tumultuous year. They got through the district plan, the long-term plan. So I'm not quite sure what the next step is for a lot of people. I think on the city council there's an attitude of just sort of letting things bed in and saying this is progress as it goes. But I think there obviously does need to be a next step, and there needs to be a more specific ask. Fleur has made, well, I think there's also another issue of that. We have seen a very strong urbanist campaign from the Greens in terms of understanding the future of cities and developing of cities. I think there's probably a bit of a missing discussion, at least lately, about, from a progressive perspective, about equity and inequality within the city. I think some proper, better reforms to community housing are overdue. Te Toi Mahana kind of shifted things around on paper, but most council tenants are still not getting rental subsidies from central government. So there's been a big focus on the development of a 21st century city, and important, but I think there's a room, there's a political avenue for progressives to push for changes in other areas.
Yeah, I think part of the progressive problem coming into the next election is hamstrung by the nature of the legislation and the approach to local government. But I do want to put a bit of a for community facilities. And if you think about the wonderful community facilities we have all over the city, public swimming pools, playgrounds, community centres, libraries, the zoo, Zealandia, all of those are what make a place for kids to grow up. And I feel like they are the antidote to Trump, actually. We need places where the community is, and we need to have places that are free and non-commercial. And it's far too expensive to go to the Wellington Zoo or Zealandia. It's a disgrace how much money you have to pay to be able to go there. Families should be able to take their kids to those places all the time and be living on, the minimum wage or the living wage. And it's just not a fair reality for those people to have a decent life in Wellington. So what I'd love to see a progressive agenda is to think about really opening up those expensive places like Space Play, Zealandia, the zoo, community facilities. We have swimming pools sunk cost. Make them free to go in. And if I think about the rate situation, it's Imagine if central government set their taxes every single year. Imagine how the right would campaign and rally around how taxation is set. We'd never get the kind of taxation that we have now. So I think some of the alarmism about rates needs to be taken and put into some context. We should break it down to what the increase means per week. Remember that people have had, what is for New Zealand, but have had nevertheless a tax cut. And we should also think about how we support those people on fixed incomes for whom rates increases hurt the most. And I've always tried to promote an idea where they could have rates as a debt against the estate, which would just operate as a not-profit for the council, but would mean if you're on a fixed income in retirement, don't need to cut rates and your family can deal with it at the end of time living in that house or on this earth. So I just think in terms of a progressive agenda, we need to think beyond what we're hamstrung by, which is the legislative environment and some of those other things, and think really carefully about how we can make Wellington better. And I really would question the value of Wellington NZ, to be honest. It spends a lot of time marketing Wellington and supporting startups and other things. Imagine if we invested that money into making the zoos, the swimming pools all free so that kids could have a great time up in Wellington. That matter sports. I mean, we have publicly owned sports fields that poor kids can't afford to play sport on. Ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. So just on the points around community facilities, I want to thank you, Fleur, for your work on that on council, because I have 2 little kids now, and the playgrounds are truly magnificent in Wellington, and actually the Wellington region. They really are astonishingly good, and obviously free to use. And I think that is super important. Like my in-laws were visiting from France recently over the summer, and they were astounded by the quality of the playgrounds. Like, it's not like that in France. In a lot of other places, it's not like that. So I think recognising what we've got and celebrating that is definitely important. In terms of a sort of progressive vision for the city, honestly, I think the appetite for any more visions for Wellington is very low. I think what people want is delivery for Wellington. Like, we know what we need to do. Water, we know what we need to do on housing, we know what we need to do on transport. We've actually got the plans in place, we've agreed them across the regional council. We're doing it. Like, so we just need to deliver more and show people what we're doing. Get out there and show people what projects we're delivering around in the streets, what houses are being built, what new houses have been consented. I think there's 264% more houses being consented now than a year ago in Wellington. And a lot of that is partly to do with the district plan, which has significantly unlocked capacity for new dwellings of different types that are cheaper to build and cheaper to live in than before. So that capacity for new dwellings in our city had been constrained by conservative politics that were actually acting against their own interests, because conservatives like low rates, right? Well, the best way to reduce the pressure on rates is increase the number of dwellings in your city. So there's a lot of incoherence actually in conservative politics, I'm afraid to say, and some economic rationality would be welcome in the sort of visioning crowd. But I think we just need to focus more on delivery and be proud of what we've achieved, communicate it better, and just keep going. Yeah. But one other thing I think is important and has possibly been neglected a bit by the progressive side is just this vibe around the city, the kind of how I think a lot of people, particularly women, young women, are not feeling safe around the city. We have my 20-year-old niece living with us at the moment. She doesn't feel safe in Courtney Place. She's not the only one. I think that needs to be dealt with. And obviously the mayor and others have been talking about that easy problem, but I think more focus on that would be good. Yeah.
All right, I've got one more question before we hand it over to the audience for questions, so start mulling now. My last question is about how progressives win at the election and how they can be held to the things that they campaign on. One thing that's significant about local politics compared to central government politics is the relative lack of political parties. It's significant that in Wellington, which is a bit more politicised, that still only half of the council is there as a member of a political party. And many of the independents would point to their independence as a badge of honour and a sign that they can be trusted. But is there another argument there that actually makes them more vulnerable to perhaps being lobbied and drifting from their commitments. Do you think that parties of the left should be getting more involved in local government?
Well, I mean, I do. I guess I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I am one. But I think I guess there's a lot of debate around this, right? You see it. People say, "Oh, political politics." They just get told how to vote. I've never been told how to vote, and we don't really do that. Like Darren, he's the chair of the regional council. He's a Labour Party member. We have other Labour Party members. We have 2 other Greens. We don't always vote the same. I mean, I remember you didn't always vote the same as your Labour colleagues, and sometimes it's not. It's not. I don't think it's like how some people say it is. They kind of say that you're sort of told what to do. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think nobody complains really, I don't think, about political party involvement in the regional council, partly because maybe they're not noticing us, but if it was really a problem, then shouldn't it be making itself apparent in the regional council as much as the city council? So that's a question. I don't think it's helpful. A lot of voters who I've spoken to have appreciated the fact that they know where I stand, and they can see that there's a sort of understood identity that is quicker to sort of associate with than 150 words in a candidate booklet that really could say anything. And a lot of people write these sort of 150 words, like a vision for Wellington type thing, that could mean anything. It doesn't tell you anything about how that person's actually going to vote. It's like, I want a better city. I want a prosperous city with thriving nature and good transport and housing. That doesn't mean anything. So I think a bit of track record and a bit of association with a sort of genuine organisation that people can relate to, whether they like it or not, is helpful. It's also it's easier to run, I think, as a candidate, if anyone's considering that, because you got other people around you who you can work with. So I think that's an advantage from a sort of social, human, psychological point of view as a candidate, which is probably underrated.
Just to pick up on that, should the Greens and Labour be running more candidates in electorates so that they could actually win majorities?
Yeah, I think that's tricky because I think you have sort of elections where you the tide's going, in the right direction for progressives, and so we should run lots of candidates. And then you might have elections where you think actually this is maybe more of a consolidation election than a growth election. And I guess if you have a strategy as a party, you've got to decide, well, where do we feel like we are. It also depends on who you got, what's the stand as a candidate, what's the quality of candidates and the track record and the ability to get things done and work as a team. I actually think ability for your candidate team to work as a team is really important. I think we've seen some of the importance of that demonstrated in the last term as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think local government has really poor voter turnout, and people basically have 150 words a sign, and actually if you're in Ray's ward, he'll probably door knock you, but that's about it. So I think political parties are really good measures of, or indicators to voters about where someone's values lie. And they're also a way that voters can hold people to account. And I was never told how to vote either by Labour, but I would have hadn't complied with the manifesto. And that's what voters have as something that they can hold people to. If you run on a platform of free zoo memberships and then you've a free zoo entry and then you vote against free zoo entry, you'll be pulled off by your party and you will deal with the consequences, and hopefully you'll change your vote. And that's the same with the airport. There were people that committed before the election that they would not and change their mind. Now they deserve to be held fully accountable when they do that. So I think it's very helpful. Yarina and Thomas actually proved that you can run 2 people in one and get both elected. So I think that's that is a question that we should try and be a bit more ambitious in terms of who we run. We've tried to do that in Labour quite some time ago, and we had examples where neither person got. We got a bit shy about that, but I do think we should be ambitious as a left. We should try and run people. As long as we've got good people and they're committed, then yeah, absolutely, we should be trying to win majorities. That's the whole point.
I like political parties in local government, and I think it's just because, as everyone's already said, voters aren't that informed and they're not that likely to turn out, at least a political party is a very clear signal of someone's values. I think there should be, I'd love to see national run candidates or maybe some sort of and ratepayers type entity. I think having more groups that can signify someone's values and what people stand for is helpful in having a more informed electorate. And yeah, like you said, those 150-word candidate statements can be very misleading, and there have been real examples on this current term of candidates who wrote very progressive-sounding things and then voted as consistently as conservatives. Like, I think it's quite useful to put a much clearer signal of what you stand for.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of my questions. Now it's over to you. We'll start with at the back there. The microphone will be run up to you as well.
Kia ora. Thank you, everybody. Is this working? Yep. Thanks so much, participants. Just considering that we've seen the election of some quite scary politicians globally recently, Trump's the obvious one, someone like Farage in the UK, and I've got some personal opinions about people in this country. What is the danger that we're going to see candidates kind of gaslighting us by talking these people outright lying during debates and so on? Is that something you think that we're shifting towards, or do you think that Wellington's a place that might be above that kind of political rhetoric?
No, not above it. It's inevitable. It will happen. It is happening. It will continue to happen. That's what we live in now. From my perspective as media, I just think the only way to counter bad coverage or lying politicians is good coverage and reporting the truth. And, I don't think we can ban that. I don't think we can legislate against it. I think we just all need to just kind of work with it. You two want to take it?
At the back there, just to the left of Ray.
Kia ora, Felicity Wong, live Wellington. Just on that point, Thomas Nash, all of you have made a little bit about housing and the district plan is a good thing. Just looking at the figures, Wellington City consents are down 49%.
That's not true.
Lower
Wellington
Hutt's
City
down 38. Poirua is down 26 and Upper Hutt's down 7. Zoning has nothing to do with creating houses. It changes where they are, but not how many you have.
Well, that's what I can tell you, because I've been literally looking at the resource consent figures today. Is that Wellington has been averaging about 20 new dwelling consents a month for the last 3 years, and in November we jumped up to 87. And I was speaking to economist Stu Donovan, who's done a lot on this, and he thinks basically the difference between May, when that came into effect, and November, when those resources come through, that's a pretty direct connection to the district plan. For the first time, Wellington's overtaken Lower Hutt, and this is, and we have a graph which will be in the Spinoff next week in my column, which is showing consenting rates across the country, and then in Wellington, low, big spike. We are starting to see progress on that. There are multiple things happening in Newtown and Island Bay that, we're seeing houses being torn down, turned into townhouses where people and families can live, and that's new customers for their community, and groups like Live Wellington who are trying to sue to stop that. But I think regardless of that, I think it's worth celebrating the district plan as being a huge success for the city.
Yeah, one of the cool things about the consents that are in fact up 264% from a year ago in Wellington City. Cool things about that is specific amendments that were made during the district plan by councillors that are now making possible specific types of development that are making room for more people. So setbacks is using more of the section for your built environment is facilitating new dwellings that wouldn't otherwise have been there. So it's really and making it cheaper for developers to making it sort of stack up more to get more housing in the central city. So I think it's a super happy development for people who want to live in Wellington, which is a lot of people.
Hands. Right, we'll go this gentleman here in the blue, and then with the headphones.
Yeah, look, I'm not really that impressed by arguments about cycling, because given the climate and topography. I'm sure it's going to be mainly a niche form of transport. But what I am really impressed by is the bus system. I live at Johnsonville. I can catch a bus right through to Island Bay if I want to. And they go about every 20 minutes. It's a wonderful service, and I think the future is not in cycles, it's in buses of some form.
I mean, I can pass to you if you like. I have 2 points that I'd like to make. First is that what's the most significant innovation in urban transport since the car? It's the electric bike. Like this is completely changing the game for people to bike to work as a genuine commuting option with very little effort. We're seeing older people, we're seeing people who live further away, we're seeing people who live on hills would never otherwise bike, but can because of an e-bike. And e-bike users tend to use their bikes more regularly than bikes, because an analog bike is much more of a recreational tool for a lot of people. E-bikes are useful commuter things. You can carry things with them. And so that is not something that, you know, dismiss. And in terms of being niche, how niche does it need to be? What's the difference on if you're driving on a rainy day compared to a sunny day, we all know the roads block up like crazy on a rainy day, right? It's about 10% more drivers that causes that. We're not doubling. It doesn't take that much to have a huge, huge difference for our transport system. If the number of people cycling in Wellington goes from 2% to 8%, that is a noticeable, quite significant difference for every other network, and that helps buses, and that helps cars, and that helps kind of the entire system.
Yeah, but the trouble is starting from a very low base.
Yep, no, you've had your question.
Question now from you.
Thanks. I'm really interested in the nuance of some of these issues, because I think like the cycleways one is a really good case in point in the discussion it brings on. So specifically related to the airport, there was a lot of a discussion about, you know, privatisation of an asset. And I myself looked at the long-term plan and went, I'm anti-privatisation. I'm going to write in my submission, this is, you know, out of line, whatever. I started looking into it, and I think, and someone can please correct me on this, it's something like Wellington City Council owns 30% of the airport, has shares, doesn't have a majority shareholding. It's effectively it's not a public asset in reality. Interested in the nuance of these issues and whether you think that, because there's been a lot of talk here about, you know, jumping on a key issue like cycleways and going, right, that's a conservative thing to attack those, become a big election issue. And I worry that the more progressives jumped on the privatisation thing and actually went, this is privatisation of an asset. And it was like, well, actually, this is more complicated than that. It's only 30% of an asset that we own. It's shareholded. It's actually, there is a big risk if there's another Kaikoura type earthquake that, you know, makes the airport unusable or whatever. And I'm wondering how you think we can usefully discuss these issues and their nuances leading into the election without necessarily going, it's this way or that way. Yeah.
Well, just on the starting point on the airport, there was a majority elected to the Wellington City Council that committed to opposing asset sales and not selling the airport. So, and the history of asset sales in New Zealand is that they happen despite governments not committing to do them. So there's a massive loss of confidence and trust from the electorate in governments who then go on to sell assets when they said they wouldn't. So that the starting point is, I, as a progressive mayor, I would have expected Tory whānau to read the room and not even put it on the table. Whether there is an argument for the airport sale, I think the corollary of that is it needs to be properly scrutinised at an election. If she really believes in it, then she should bring it to an election and have it scrutinised. I don't buy the insurance argument. If Wellington is so damaged by an earthquake, the 30% that we own, 33.3% we own of the airport, is not going to do much. We are going to need central government intervention. And I guess the other thing is, I don't really buy the argument that we should sell assets because we own so little of them. We should actually buy more of it, and we should use our moral power as a shareholder in better ways. And actually, funnily enough, Celia Wade-Brown, when she sat on the board, I think quite effectively used her position as a board member to make the airport take things like waste more seriously. She was able to really exert influence there. She was able to exert influence on the strategic nature of future investments of the airport. So to say you can't exert the right influence or you don't have enough, really just a smokescreen for an idea that never had any public support and actually was a very divisive approach to how you lead a city and did lasting damage to relationships, which I think is such a shame. And as a leader, you should think carefully before putting any of those kind of issues on the table.
All right, we've got time for one more question, and I've informally promised it to the man in the pink shirt here. Via a nod.
Thank you. Fleur's comment on the ability of councillors to challenge the authoritarianism of paid city council officials scares hell out of me. In central government, that parliamentarians or ministers would tolerate that from departmental heads. I can assure you they don't. What do we do about it? I've never heard this before. I've lived in Wellington since 1971. I had never realised how powerless our councillors are on raising issues, and to me that is totally wrong. How do we fix it? I think that is just disgraceful. It's authoritarianism at its worst and at its most subtle, and it's not actually.
Well, I'll just start by saying I agree with you that it's actually very dangerous and it's a very big issue and we shouldn't shy away from talking about it. But as some of it's by design and some of it is the culture of the place. I guess the other thing, and the other kind of point I would, we're talking about a progressive agenda for the mayoralty. I've tried unsuccessfully to advise mayoral candidates in the past that they should actually make this part of the platform. And if you look, for example, at the support an executive leadership team member has at Wellington City Council, when I was there, they had full-time and a political advisor, advisor whose role seemed to be to work with the various reports that they had, so they sat above them. So 2 full-time paid staff and a salary which is about triple what a city councillor gets. Now, my suggestion to mayoral candidates is run on a platform of better resourcing councillors. Say I'm going to culturally try and turn around the anti-democratic culture that exists and I'm going to resource councillors. I'm going to help them with their administration. You get no admin help when you're a city councillor. I answered all my own emails. They all do. It's ridiculous. And if you get information out of the organisation, it's incredibly difficult. They set up a generic email address for you and you're treated like a ratepayer, effectively. So to me, a progressive state should run on a platform of this, and they should own that it won't be popular. Like, this isn't the thing that's going to win everyone's votes, but it's earnestly important for how this city is run in the future. And I think, yeah, anyone out there who's running for mayor, put this as one of their promises.
Yep. Just one thing. I think you'll have seen Yes Minister, and I think it certainly does happen in central government, where, I mean, I know ministers who've struggled with the Treasury, with other organisations that have huge amounts of power and huge amounts of time. They can outwork you, they've got more resources. It's a big problem in the world where you have senior civil servants that have an agenda. And it's tricky because you can't expose it, right? It's difficult to expose it, right? It's sort of problematic to expose it, right? Because these people have like employment rights, and that's important. So that relationship between elected members, whether in central government and local government, and senior executive officials, is, I think, it's one of the key ingredients to successfully running an organisation or a city or a government department. And I think it's a mixture of what you were saying, Joel, of like building strong relationships of trust and confidence, but also being able to challenge each other, and sometimes being able to put significant amounts of critical pressure on each other in various ways. And good relationships of trust and confidence will allow the protagonists to put pressure on each other in ways that are respectful. I think we need to get that culture of doing that in place. No, I think there's definitely a tension in the regional council between elected members and senior executives. Yeah, I mean, I don't say that in a critical or a bad way. I think they would probably agree. You have different mandates, if you like, and you have different responsibilities, you have different kind of constituencies, and so you're always going to get that tension, and it's a question of how to manage that tension in a good way, respectfully, where you can find the common and move it forward. And personally, I think being able to build a relationship, a genuine relationship of respect and trust and confidence is really important, and not enough focus is put on that, in my view.
All right. Well, having heard all that, does anybody want to announce a run for the mayoralty? Okay. Sean, you can talk to Fleur about that afterwards. All right. Well, for coming along tonight. It's been a really excellent discussion, and thank you to our three panellists.